welcome listeners to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Ostler. My guest on today's podcast is my brother, David Ostler, to talk about his new book. This is the second book he's written. It's called Healing Our Divides, Answering the Savior's Call to be Peacemakers. Like his first book, Bridges Ministering to Those Who Question, this is a serious book. I've been watching Dave write this for a period of time, and he's shown me excerpts, and it's a really powerful, needed book in our community. In the show notes, we'll link to, you can buy it on Amazon as a book and also an Audible. The book is published by Coford Books. We'll link to Coford Books if you want to buy it from Coford Books. The book, like David's first book, should be at Deseret Book. We're recording this in mid-April, so I would assume May, June, you'll find it at Deseret Book, like his first book. So welcome to the podcast, David.
Hey, thanks, Richard. Good to be on. Good to see you.
Dave is joining us from his home in Falls Church, where he spends 9 or 10 months of the year. He also spends some time in Heber City, Wasatch County during the summer. So we're looking forward to having Dave out in Utah in this beautiful summertime. But yeah, authors usually kind of talk about, in fact, I remember once you telling me I'm just going to be a one-time author. And I don't know if you remember that conversation, and maybe I'm just forgetting that it was, we actually had that conversation. But obviously you've written another book. It's a serious book. It's taken lots of time. It's a labor of love. But just kind of share with our listeners why you decided to write a second book, who you hope will read it, what you hope it will accomplish, what need or issues you see in our faith community you hope it addresses.
I think I am an accidental author. I didn't plan on writing any books, let alone a first or a second. But when I wrote my first book, Bridges really taught me that we have real limitations on understanding why people believe differently and how we should relate to them. I saw, a lot of disconnection of wonderful people that just no longer believed the same and had trouble reconciling not only why that would happen, but the implications for their relationship and for their families. And although it was about kind of a disconnection about religious or Latter-day Saint beliefs, over time I've seen that the same principles really apply to any beliefs. And the book really came about in a ward conference. In our second hour, a member of the stake presidency was teaching on Elder Renlund's talk about contention. So this would have been in November 2022, maybe 2021. I'm not sure about the year. But, I think most of us as Latter-day Saints believe that contention is a canker in our society, that affects our relationships, that it frays the fabric of the church in our country and, all of the communities in which we live in. And as a member of stake presidency was teaching on this, the question came to me as to what skills do I need as a person to be able to live in a divided world and to not be trapped by the contentious culture in which we live in. And I even raised my hand and said, what skills would you suggest I develop? And there were a few kind of suggestions, but the talk didn't go there. It can't. It's just a short 15-minute talk in general conference. So it's not a kind of a textbook on human behavior and why we act the way we do and what are our natural tendencies and what can I do differently. I think most people left the meeting saying, I just need to avoid having controversial or potentially contentious discussions, and I'm just going to try and be peaceful. And that's an approach, but I also think that we as Latter-day Saints are called to be in the world, but not of the world, to love our neighbor. And it's hard to love our neighbor if we're kind of living in a bubble of peacefulness so that we don't engage with anyone who is different because there might be disagreement or contention or whatever. So that really triggered me to want to write this book, to be able to take the principles that we as Latter day Saints believe and hold dear and understand how we can apply them in our lives against a backdrop of what, in the United States at least, is increasing polarization and contention.
That's great. I love this, living in the bubble of peacefulness and how that's probably, not practical in a real world. And we have to engage because we're part of the world. And there's people in our congregations and our families that have different feelings politically, maybe, and just other ways. And to develop the skills to be able to not sell out our own beliefs, but to find peace in sort of this diversity that's part of life is a good thing. But you're right, we don't spend a lot of time developing the skills to do that. So keep sharing.
So, we live in a pretty challenging time. So I kind of dug in and said, what's going on? What is different today? It feels different to me today than it did 20 years ago or 40 years ago. And the answer is it is different. It's actually very different. And the United States, on all measures of polarization and contention, is worse today than it's ever been in my lifetime. There might be some times in past history, maybe around the Civil War or at other kind of points in time, but today is worse, and it's worse by a lot. And one measure is to measure our acceptance of political violence as a means of resolving our differences. And in the United States today, we have the same level of acceptance of political violence that Northern Ireland had in the 1970s. We don't have the same violence on the street, but there's many people that think that the only way we're going to resolve our issues is through violence. And I suspect that most every person that will listen to this has some relationship that has had contention and alienation because of differences of belief. It might have happened in a ward. There's been polarization in our wards. I know that COVID was very difficult to navigate as a society, and that those issues came in our front door into our chapels. And there's people that had a lot of different feelings about that, and some congregations handled things one way, and that might have been alienating to one group, and others handled it another way. There's other alienating issues that are religious in tone, but play out in the political arena. And so the question is, what do we as Latter-day Saints do? And I think we answer the question using what the Savior has asked us to do, which is to go into all the world, yet to be peacemakers, because blessed are the peacemakers. And we're to love our neighbors. And that means that we leave our bomb shelters where some might be comfortable waiting for the second coming, but we leave, our houses and engage in a world. And we do that with the principles of discipleship. But we aren't afraid or worried about engaging with people of difference because we have developed the skills, the mindset of discipleship that allows us to interact with people that have different beliefs, and to do that in a positive, constructive, meaningful way, even though we will probably never completely agree with those we interact with.
A real need for that. Um, I have beliefs that are very, different on some topics than fellow humans, fellow Latter-day Saints, even though my fellow Latter-day Saints believe in the same church and the same gospel. And probably divided by political ideology. And I think my younger self would just say, I wish people believed like I did, so that we'd have sort of harmony or unity and common political ideology. But now I'm recognizing that that's just not going to happen. And I think you're right that COVID helped me understand that. But I don't know how to, sort of, I don't have the tools really to just sort of engage with people that are really different on certain topics. So I don't usually engage with those people. So that's probably one of the reasons your book's really helpful. I think my natural instinct is, well, if people believe more like me and saw things my way, then we'd have more peace. But I think you're probably trying to help us understand that people are going to believe what they're going to believe to some extent. And our job is to develop tools to find common ground where we can still accomplish good in our faith community and our country and still have differences.
Yeah, you know, President Nelson a year ago in General Conference gave what, I was writing this book, so of course it resonated with me, but I think it resonated with most of us, called Peacemakers Needed. And he said, peacemaking is a choice. How we treat each other really matters. How we speak to and about others at home, at church, at work, and online really matters. And contention drives away the spirit every time. Contention reinforces the false notion that confrontation is the way to resolve differences, but it never is. So he lays out, the Savior's path, which is engagement, but engagement in a particular way, um, respecting, dignifying difference, advocating for our beliefs, but doing that in a productive as opposed to a destructive way. I've so I left that ward conference, and I tend to think about some of these issues, and I wanted to kind of define what contention was, because is disagreement contention? Is having conflicting points of view and expressing those contentious? And I don't think necessarily so. And so um, this is what I wrote. So apologies if I read a little paragraph of
Good.
the book, but I'd rather read it than ad lib it, because I wanted to be really thoughtful about the definition. So contention is embodied in how we feel about the other person and their belief. I define contention as expressed or unexpressed negative interactions with another person and their belief, which creates distance or contempt. It may surface as anger and argument, but also can be silently unexpressed or cloaked in politeness. It's not necessarily found in what we say to others, but how we feel about them. Contempt is at the heart of contention. When we feel that we are better than the other person and that they have nothing worthwhile to offer us, we don't respect the other person as our neighbor, as a child of God, or as one from whom we can learn. Instead of offering others dignity, something everyone desires, we feel contempt. They become an enemy or a villain, an object of pity and disgust. Contention is a form of violence. It harms and damages ourselves and others. So, it's not yelling per se, but it's looking at other people and saying, I hate them. They're my enemies. They're, pick a label, apostates, self righteous, um, fascists, socialists, country hating, Antifas, pick your label. It's when we diminish them to a caricature as opposed to reflect that they are a child of God, that have life experiences and beliefs that have led them to a particular place. Then we can have discussion with them in such a way that takes that dignity and embodies it and moves away from contention. That's not the whole book, but that's kind of the underlying premise. And then there's a set of skills that the book builds on that tells us how we can do that. And it talks about the natural man tendencies that we have and the forces that act upon us that create contention. and how we can combat those. Contention is this disease that permeates the world today, at least in the United States. And we catch the disease unknowingly. And we need to develop the systems in ourselves to be able to heal from them, from that infection, and to develop immunity so that we can, in fact, um, live peacefully in our difference. Because, you know, in spite of our well thinking processes that cause us to come to our beliefs, probably all of us have beliefs that are just wrong. Um, and we're going to live in that world where people have different beliefs, some of which are right and some of which are wrong. And we still want to be able to function as a society and feel tightly connected to each other because we are connected to each other through our heavenly parents and through a redeeming Savior.
Keep sharing. That's really good stuff, Dave.
Um, One of the things that I dug into is what is the natural man here? So, the way I define natural man is we are human. We have physical limitations. I can't transport, I can't fly. My brain also functions in a particular way, and it has limitations too. And I like where Paul in the New Testament talks about seeing through a glass darkly, um, with distortion, with limitations, where we don't perceive eternity or reality clearly because we are human. And some of it is limitation of life experience, but some of it is also just the physical scaffolding upon which we reside. So there's some really interesting psychology studies, and I'll share maybe one or two with you.
Please.
So um, there's studies that rate people's attractiveness, and so psychologists will take pictures of people and say, "How attractive are these people?" And one thing they found is that if they show people attractiveness, they'll give an unbiased answer. But if they tell them that the person is from an opposing political party, their attractiveness goes down. So if I'm a Republican and looking at people that I think are Democrats, I rate them less attractively than if I think they're Republicans.
Interesting.
And this is what we call in group bias. It says that when I think about people in my group, and we can define them as members of the church or my economic or my racial or my education group or my political ideology, I give them more grace. I give them more, I cut them slack, if you will. But if they're in the out group, my out group, then I'm more skeptical of them. And there's, probably some real reasons why our minds work that way. Back 2,000 years ago when we lived in small villages, we were right to be skeptical of that group that, lived somewhere else. They might raid us, they might burn our crops, they might kill us. But that tendency appears to be an in-baked tendency that's in our brains. Yet, as Latter-day Saints, we're all children of God. That is our primary identity. President Nelson and other general authorities have highlighted how our identity should fundamentally be as a child of God. And yet we will always carry these sub-identities. They'll be our family, our culture, our political ideology, these things matter. But sometimes they become so defining that we take that natural inborn in-group bias and we then think those people are our enemies. And because we think they're our enemies, we choose not to engage with them, or the way we engage with them is the way, maybe 2,000 years ago we did with that neighboring village. We built a wall, or we built weapons, or we preemptively attacked them, or whatever we did to make ourselves feel safe. But we don't live in that world today. We live interspersed, and the out group is in our families, then it's on our same pew or the neighboring pew. It's in our cul-de-sacs or on our streets or in our apartment building. So we are all interspersed with people that have this difference, and we just struggle sometimes to productively engage or even think about other people that way. There's a lot of forces today that capitalize on that. Some are kind of benign, like car commercials that make you want to buy the sporty, off-roading SUVs so that you can identify with being in the active group. But sometimes it's political programming or it's news media. They intentionally create contention as a way to create ratings, to get donations, to activate you to vote. And so they create fear or anger in the background as a way for us to develop loyalty and to disengage with the other side. So we live in that world, and that world is very active in the United States these days. And so we absorb that, and that becomes kind of, we're conditioned to act that way. But we don't need to. There's nothing that says we can't overcome kind of this physical way in which our brain operates, or we can't see through the culture that society is living in right now that is very polarized and contentious. We can rise above that. And most of the book really focuses in on how do we rise above that? What can we do differently? What are the psychological or religious principles that we can focus on that help us um, uh, shed that natural man to make that glass less dark so that we can see more clearly through it. I've written the book in a different way than I wrote Bridges. As I write along, there'll be what I call a thought box that is interspersed in the text. And it will have the reader kind of pause and think about a circumstance that they have had, a skill that they found effective. So it's intended to be a pretty interactive book that we can step in and out of as we go through the book and see where individually we are, what our own individual profiles look like, and what is working and what is not working for us. What works for me might be different than you. What's not working for me and where I'm falling short, you may have already figured out. So it gives people an opportunity to kind of self-pace and figure out how to apply this or think about it in their life.
It's really helpful. Just to comment, I'm more aware of the fear and anger that's part of the political narrative on both sides, and how that's driving votes and driving donations, um and I just think we all need to be aware of that. I remember telling some of the YSAs to just stop watching cable news because it just filled them with so much fear of the future and stress of today. And then someone pointed out to me, when people say they are coming after you, that um, that person said to me, you need to know people when they say that, and you say who they are and what is the threat. So that's probably some of the things your book gets in, is just more mental tools and discipline to not be activated by some of these fear-based messages, and think critically, and like I've tried to do more, who are they and what is the threat? Otherwise, it's just nebulous sort of activating thing that creates fear and anger, and may create votes and donations to your point, but doesn't create a Zion like people. And so I assume some of your book is just developing tools to kind of navigate through the fear and anger messages that we're just going to receive, and sort of give context to those so we emotionally handle them in a better and more mature way and not get into these bunker mentalities. So keep sharing.
Yeah. So, the car company that wants to sell you on an SUV, they understand how our brains work and they understand what kind of images to evoke to sell cars, right? That's advertising. Um, we've been advertising in society for over 4,000 years. There's advertisements back in Babylon. People are always trying to sell something and they have a reason to do that. And they use their best and most persuasive arguments to do that. Well, there's people and organizations that understand for their benefit, the benefit of their readership, their clicks, their donations. They've figured out that fear is a very effective tactic, and they use sounds and images and extreme language in such a way that um, creates threats in people's minds. Um, we can see through that if we're aware that that's what they're doing.
Good.
We can listen to that kind of political media. I'm not saying that it's good for us, but we don't have to be victims to this. But we do have to step back and say, who are they? And the answer is they're largely businesses. Why are they doing that? To make money. How do they do that? That's their marketing message, just like that SUV going up that mountain road to this clear, beautiful mountain lake. They have a marketing message that they have figured out creates economic value to them. And whether it's a social media company that wants you to come back again and again, or whether it's a news media or an advocacy group that is trying to raise donations for a particular cause, or a politician that is trying to get you to vote for them, they have a plan. And the plan is developed by psychologists that look at our brains and understand how the plan will affect us. And we don't have to be slaves to that. The scripture that I like on this comes from the word of wisdom that talks about how in the last day, by the designs of people, how does that scripture go? That by the evil designs of people, they will manipulate us, is effectively what it is. And it's talking specifically about the word of wisdom, but it applies to other things that aren't helpful to us. And we can see through that. I can look at a commercial for a cigarette and I don't feel tempted to have a cigarette. And I can also look at a political mailer that comes in my front door and realize the message they're trying to give me and not fall prey to it. But I have to understand that algorithm. I have to understand that message. I have to understand what they're trying to do and how my brain is interacting with that. And I can set that aside.
Keep sharing.
So, some of your listeners may be interested in some of the skills that people can use. I think there is a natural tendency to just want to avoid all of this stuff and to just say, I'm going to live a peaceful life and not worry about this kind of stuff. But many of us have concerns about the world and want to engage in it. We just don't know how. One of the skills that people can have is they can decide when they're entering into a discussion with someone who has different beliefs, what they want to accomplish in that discussion. And they can be thoughtful about that. And let me offer 3 positive and 1 negative goal that people could have. So one goal would be to develop a stronger personal relationship and to want to connect with someone. So 2 people that have different beliefs about immigration or abortion or COVID or whatever, they can enter into a conversation. And if they have a goal that they want to feel closer to each other at the end of that conversation, they will approach that conversation very differently. They'll ask more questions, they'll be more respectful, they'll want to get inside that person and understand where they're coming from. And if that conversation, if the other partner doesn't want to do that and just wants to argue, then they can change the topic to something that will build the relationship. And they can say, we've talked enough about immigration. I want to understand, where did you go on vacation? What did you do? What was fun? How's your family doing? And figure out a topic that will connect them. Now, so two people are in a conversation, and if you don't have a shared goal, you need to find a shared goal. And it may be that you avoid having those kinds of conversations if that other person isn't prepared for them. The second goal is to learn why someone thinks the way they do.
Oh,
So I want to understand why someone has a different view on pick a topic, abortion, immigration, the election, who they're going to vote for. And I will ask questions because I'm curious in how they came about that idea, what about their life experience, their beliefs caused them to think what they did. And I'm going to ask questions like, I'd be curious to know what caused you to think about that? What experiences have you had in your life? On a scale of 1 to 10, how certain are you about that belief? Would anything change your mind? And you can have a very different conversation there where what they're telling you isn't threatening. It doesn't bother you that they have a different belief because pretty much everyone comes from a place of legitimacy in their beliefs. They really do believe what they believe. Something about their life took them to that belief. And you don't know that unless you ask them. And if you ask them, you will learn about them, which is important to building a relationship. So it satisfies that first goal too. But you might actually learn something about yourself and about your own belief and where it comes from. And if you're curious, you'll be open. I'm not saying we enter those conversations to change our own minds, but often we find that our perspective is very centric to our own experiences. And other people experience the world differently. And because of that, they have things to offer us in that conversation. So, wanting to know what other people think is, in fact, in some ways, it's really just a form of ministry. It's a form of connecting and loving, but it's also a way in which we learn. And the third is we can try and change people's minds. But there's specific skills that are required to do that. And we often don't use those well. The fourth, and I'm going to not talk too much about that area because the fourth one kind of illustrates the opposite of this. If our objective is to tell someone they are wrong, that's a bad objective. Just get that out of your mind. That just doesn't work. All the psychology says is if I tell you your belief is wrong, you're going to be more firmly entrenched in that belief when you leave that conversation. You're not going to change their mind. So, if that's your belief that they're wrong, you got to change the way in which you're going to approach that conversation. Because telling them they're wrong or to listen to this podcast or to read this article, that won't work. Psychology shows that doesn't work. We become threatened in those situations and work to defend the beliefs that we hold. But we as Latter-day Saints go into the world and we try and change people's religion. We send missionaries to teach the gospel and ask people to join the church. We invite them. We don't tell them to join the church. We don't tell them that their beliefs are wrong. We invite them to study with us. We ask them inspired questions about their life and what they believe. And because of that, some people become open to changing. I've been in missionary conversations. I've served a number of full-time missions, and I regret to say this publicly, but there have been times where I've told people they are wrong, and I've bashed Bibles. I've, done all the bad things that missionaries can do. It never works. I never leave that with a stronger relationship. I never leave that discussion with a connection with the person. But where we talk, where we exchange, where I dignify where they're coming from, um, where they express openness about their life, we are far more likely to help them on a pathway to discovery that will, in fact, have them choose to change their beliefs. That's, um, so that's a skill set. Is we can decide what we want to do in the conversation and set a goal on that. Sometimes we need to change the goal as we go along, but we can, in fact, use those kinds of framing in our mind to change the way in which we have that conversation. How does that skill resonate with you?
It's really helpful. What I'm getting from Dave is just as I approach relationships, what's my goal? And if my goal is to change them or be right or bring them to my way of thinking, I'm probably going to be frustrated. But if my goal is to be closer together and strengthen my relationship with that person, it's really a whole difference in that. And these seems especially important in our families, in our congregations with people that we want to have relationships with. There may be people that we just, we don't need to go through this process because they're not sort of in our immediate or secondary circle. But then your points about there's a lot of empathy you created for people that believe different, and your desire to assume that they've come to that perspective through their lived experiences and be curious about their experiences um, and the conversations that then can happen versus the polarizing, emotionally charged. But it also takes some emotional maturity and some skills that are in your book to do this, and it's really needed. So I love that, and I think I wrote down mixed faith marriages because I get a lot of requests for podcasts with couples that are in mixed faith, and I think we all know what that is. Where one in our faith community, or one's active LDS and one is not, and they still are wanting to make the marriage work and the family be strong. But this idea of um, they're going to share common goals, and it may not be the same belief about the church, but they may find a foundation in common goals. So I'm thinking this book would help couples that are in that sort of situations and many others that really want to preserve the family relationship. Um, and maybe their first approach to do that is everybody's got to think the same because that's the way we've lived for 10 or 20, 30 years. And that's the way I grew up. And now it's a whole different world where there's people that have different faith than I do and people that have different political belief. And they're all still in this circle, but there's just so much difference. I don't know how to navigate this. So I'm thinking your book will be really helpful in those two examples.
Yeah, so there is another skill that I talk about, which is how to create the right setting for
Good.
necessary conversations where there's these kinds of differences. So I don't have to go to my next door neighbor and talk about something where we have difference. But if I'm in a family, if I'm in a marriage, we have to navigate that. And if we don't, our marriage or our family is going to suffer, might break up, might dissolve. But so, what is the right setting? How do we craft a setting for having necessary, required conversations where we would have conflict? Um, and some of this work comes from an outside expert. Her name's Monica Guzman, and she has little dials that you can set to evaluate your the setting. And the first dial is time. You have to have adequate time to have these conversations. You can't have an important conversation about how do we raise the children in a mixed faith marriage where one spouse believes in LDS beliefs and another doesn't. That's not a 2-minute conversation.
Hmm.
So you have to have adequate time. So if you're trying to have that conversation while someone is going out the door, or in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it's not going to be an effective conversation. It will end up having contention. It will change someone's objective to say, you need to change because we only have 5 minutes for us to have this conversation. And so this is what we should do. So that's not going to be effective. The second, I'm not going to go through them all, but the second one that I think is really intriguing is parity, where one person has power over the other. You're creating a setting where it's difficult to have conversations about difficult but essential topics. Um, so if one spouse says, it's my way or the highway, or I'm going to withhold, or I earn the money, or, I raise the kids and this is the way we're going to do it, then you're going to have a very different kind of conversation than when you dignify the other person and give them the same level of power that you have. Now, that's scary because that means when you give away that power, to some extent, you give away some control of where this is going. But if it is a marriage, it will only be successful if there is an equivalency of power in that relationship. So those are two that are on the dial. There's four others that maybe don't apply so much in this. Well, one does. One is called containment. If we're having these conversations in public, they work differently than if we have them in private. If we're having a discussion about how we raise the children in our mixed faith marriage, and we're doing that on social media, so the whole world sees, then it's going to be a very different conversation than when it's done inside our home with just the husband and wife working these issues out. And so containment matters. We will be more honest. We will be more vulnerable. We will listen better when the whole world isn't playing along with us. I don't know how these reality marriage shows work, where the whole world's playing along with them.
Hmm.
I don't know how anything can get resolved that way. They need to be resolved between the two partners, maybe with some help from the outside, but with help that is, disclosed, which is accepted, as opposed to just playing it out in public. So those are a couple of the tools that might be helpful kind of in that kind of setting. There is a spiritual tool that I find is helpful here. It's what we call dignity. This is a belief that every soul is a child of our heavenly parents, and within them is that seed of divinity. And because of that, they are never our enemies. They are never anything other than a child of God. And we see them in that light. The church some time ago talked about dignity. The church put out a public statement at one point to talk about this. And I keep rereading this because I think it reflects where I want to be with other people. We find meaning in human connection when we climb out of ourselves and discover the dignity of others, even if we disagree. And no one should have to give up their identities, since no particular group has a monopoly on all that is wise, beautiful, and just. Everyone can learn from everyone else. Our experiences have gaps that need to be bridged, and our perspectives have blind spots that need to be filled. This engagement between difference is called pluralism, a society organized under common laws and civilization, but with no single belief system that wields total influence, not just one or even two, but many perspectives and traditions can coexist within a shared moral framework.
Wow.
The church's statement here is about a political dilemma and about how in that dilemma, we can dignify these different points of views. But we could rewrite that pretty easily to apply to a marriage where husband thinks this way and wife thinks this way. We can navigate that in a school board. We could navigate that in a town council um, because we reflect that other people have legitimate points of view that are important to them and well formed. And we may believe they are wrong, but if we are committed to each other, and I want to talk about that commitment here in a minute, if we're committed to each other, that means that we are also committed to understanding and to some extent accommodating the differences that that implies. Let me talk about that connection that we as Latter-day Saints feel. And it's embodied in the temple. It's embodied in ordinances. When we are baptized, we make a promise. The church reflects this in some of the materials it describes about baptism. Is embodied in what happened at the Waters of Mormon, where we commit to be a people, where we commit to comfort each other, to mourn with each other. Those are the words of Mosiah 18. And because of that, we connect to each other. We are confirmed in front of our congregation. We renew and take the sacrament in a congregation. And then in the temple, we are sealed together. We sometimes think about that sealing as just to our immediate family, but it's sealed everywhere. We are all sealed eventually, ultimately, into one eternal family. So there aren't manner of ites in this sealing. There's differences between our individual natures in this web of sealing, but we are all of that divine origin. And because of that, we um, deserve and want dignity. We want our voices to be heard and considered. We're willing to compromise on certain issues as others are willing to compromise and accommodate us because of those issues.
Wow. I'm just reminded listeners a little bit of my own journey to try to do better. And I read from Brene Brown, one of the things she said, which I believed in at the time, you're either for us or you're against us. And he helped me to see that that may not always be the most helpful way of thinking in that binary way. And he also taught me about common enemy intimacy, as if the bond we share is simply we hate the same group. We do feel this connection, but it's not long term sort of peace that we're looking for, and it's not consistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I'm guessing as I read your book, I'll learn new things like some of the things that Brene Brown. I've always felt her book and your book are sort of taking gospel principles that exist or teachings of Christ, same thing, and sort of using pragmatic tools, like have these conversations one on one and not as someone's going out the door, and just um, to be able to give me better skills to be able to do this in a real thoughtful, intentional way. So keep sharing.
Another tool is called the Dignity Index. And this has been developed uh, and actually is used in Utah. Utah is one of the pilot sites of this. And what has the way it's been applied in Utah is in political debates, a panel of students, I think they're University of Utah students, will rate the specific communication in a political discussion on an 8-point scale of dignity. Like the lowest, dignity index level 1, feels the other side is less than human and calls for or approves violence. We hear that in political speech, right? So that's a 1. A 4 is mocks and attacks the other side's backgrounds, beliefs, commitments, competence, or performance. 6 is sees it as a welcome duty to work with the other side to find common ground and to act on it. 8 sees self as a part of every group by refusing to hate anyone, offers dignity to everyone. So I've kind of looked at that
Mm,
and I've said, where am I in my interactions with people? How would I get evaluated by a dispassionate university student if they, if I had a microphone on and they saw how I interacted with people? Would I be a 1, a 4, a 6, an 8? And I'm trying to be more and more like an 8. That doesn't mean I don't have strong opinions. That doesn't mean I don't have political preferences or a desire to have certain things accomplished in society that some people oppose. But it means that I can still dignify other people. Let me tell you one more skill. A skill is, and this can be a skill in what comes out of our mouth or what we think in our head, is the words we choose to describe people who are different than us. And I've even had to rewrite scripture here. Or I haven't rewritten it, but I've gone to a different translation because we sometimes hear that we need to love our enemies. But there's a different scripture reading of that I like, which is love those people that hate you. And that's different than loving our enemies, because if I think of someone as my enemy, they're immediately in the out group and I'm fearful of them. If I think of them as being different or having negative feelings towards me, I still can dignify them. I still can have compassion. I can still be wanting to establish a relationship with them. Maybe there are some enemies. Maybe there's some people that just want to burn it down or want to, do that. But in my interactions with people, I mean, I'm not a political leader. I don't have those kinds of people in my life. They're people who just think differently than me. They're not trying to bring back slavery. They're not trying to, pick your issue. They're not bad people. They're just people who think differently. So I can treat them according to dignity index level 8. I can choose not in my mind to label them as an enemy or hateful or harmful, or I can choose to label them in such a way that I have commonality with them. There's an interesting group out there. It's called the Heterodox Academy. And its premise is that we have far more in common than we do that divides us. Most of us agree on most things. It's just a few things that divide us. So I choose to think where I have someone who disagrees with me about something that I think is really important, to find that commonality because it's always there. They want to raise their children well. They want to live in a peaceful society. They have love towards groups of people, maybe towards everyone. And so I can find commonality with them. And when I do that, it changes how I feel about them. They look more attractive. I offer them more grace. I cut them slack. I don't think about them as skeptically as I might otherwise. So that's what the book's about. I don't think for me this isn't. Not. I don't want to say I'm not going to write a book or I am going to write a book. For me, I'm going to live in this book for a while.
cool.
I'm going to go back to it again and again. I'm going to reread the Dignity Index periodically. I think that where I want my discipleship, my relationship with God to be, is to understand that second great commandment about how to love my neighbor, how to understand my neighbor, how to develop connection with my neighbor. And when my neighbor disagrees, how to enter into a conversation with them where we can come up with solutions, may take us time, may never get there, solutions that work for us both. So that's the work I'm personally trying to do. That's what I think discipleship for Dave Ostler means, for the next several years. I think that's what the route of being a peacemaker means. President Nelson, in that talk about peacemakers needed, says building bridges of understanding is difficult. I think he's really, really right. I think we have so much natural man, so much culture that points us to a different way that it really requires real work to do that. It doesn't consume my every moment, but I'm reflective on a regular basis about where I am with these principles and what I can do. So that's healing our divides.
I like that it's plural. Um, this is a serious book, listeners. I sometimes go on your first Amazon to see the top 50 or 100 LDS books on Amazon, and your book, Bridges Ministering to Those Who Question, is often in the top 50, top 100. I think that book is 4 years old, 5 years old. I don't know if you know. So Dave's an author just in that there's not a lot of authors in this space of trying to bring us together as the same human family. You, along with Gerald E. Renshaw, founded a Facebook group. I'll link to that in the show notes. It's a Facebook group of LDS parents that have children that no longer believe. And I'm in that group and I read the stories there of, of tension that can happen. But I read really thoughtful things from the participants in that group. And I just recognize the need as I read that Facebook group and others that I'm in, and of the book that you've written, which I think is an extension of gospel principles in a practical way to be able to do what you're accomplishing. I love your focus on, at the end of the day, we do have a lot in common and we have shared goals. Most families want to preserve the family relationship. They want to come together at Thanksgiving and feel like they're a family, um, and all come together and share a meal together or whatever the holiday is. And I realize there's lots of families that's not possible right now over religion or politics, even though most people want to be together. I think we're wired for connection. So I think, a podcast probably doesn't do justice to this book, listeners. And I love that you created some boundaries where if you're a toxic relationship or it's a harmful relationship, it's okay to be separated from those situations. You've got to take care of yourself. Um, I also love this idea that I've shared in the past that Zion used to be for me was sameness. Dave and I both grew up in a very homogeneous part of Salt Lake City in a very homogeneous time, so to speak, whereas my thought was everybody was very much the same as me, politically, economically, and I thought that was Zion. But now Zion is unity and diversity, where we are actually a stronger people because we have differences and we use those differences because of our unity or our same goals, to use some of the things you mentioned, to be able to bless more people's lives, lift up the hands of more people because we have some differences. And our families are better off because of these differences if we can use the tools that you've outlined in this book. I think the listeners have picked up that you've gone to a lot of external resources. This isn't just Dave Ostler journaling his 60 years of trying to um, sort of first person solve this problem. I think part of that is that in your own lived experiences, but you've gone to a lot. When I sort of saw you writing this book a couple of times, we crossed paths. You were going on deep dives, reading lots of other books. You wanted to know everything that's been written about this. I don't know how many books you read. And I saw you outlining books and I saw you going to the very best minds on this subject, that understand human behavior and wanting, and the very best from our scriptures, the very best from church leader talks, and wanting to bring all that very best thought into this book so that we, the readers, have better tools to be able to accomplish the goals in our heart, which is to find peace and to find unity and to honor differences, but not have us drive a wedge and to feel like we can go to church and be at peace with people that feel differently about political issues or even issues within our church. So I just think this is the kind of book that in 4 years from now, I'll go to the Amazon top 50, top 100, and your book will be there. And um, it's just a really needed book. And I think some of these books have very short shelf lives. I think this, like your first book, is a very long shelf life and is very needed. And I just encourage our listeners to get a copy of it, read it. I think it'll give us all tools. Talk to, some of the Facebook groups I am are people that are having choppy experiences at church and they go to Elders Quorum Relief Society and there's one or two people there that have really strong opinions that kind of make the whole experience really difficult for them. And they're not a family member, so they're not sure they want to confront them. They don't really want to say anything generally, although some do in Relief Society or Elders Quorum or Sunday School. But it just grinds on them all week, and gradually it can even make the experience such that they feel anxiety going to church and they don't want to go to church, even though they believe in the church. Um, any advice for the people that are just feel like they're in a minority in their political positions and or even some aspects of the church and are anxious about going to church because their views are less represented or they sometimes feel like they're under attack for their views?
I don't think I have a magic answer on that. If I go back to that tool about settings, and you have these dials, how do if the dials all point in the right direction, you can have better conversations than if they don't. And one of them is time. Some of our meetings are pretty short. And if we want to talk about meaty issues in those meetings, then we do run up against time. Second is consent. There has to be kind of agreement about the kinds of things we're going to talk about. And when we have 50 people in the meeting, not only do we struggle with consent to talk about some difficult topics, but we also have a problem with containment where it's difficult to talk about things that are really personal, knowing these are our neighbors and that they might think differently of us if we express our points of view. Uh, so the setting itself is kind of a challenge for these topics. And that's why generally these topics don't come up there. And we talk in fairly general principle-based terms as opposed to, trying to sort out the complexities of it. The way maybe if is a listener that says, I struggle to participate because mainly I hear messages that I disagree with, maybe they're political undertones or, whatever. I think we also have to decide what our objective is in terms of coming to those meetings.
Mm.
And I think we can go to those meetings setting an objective that says, I'm less interested in what is discussed, and I'm more interested in the people that are doing the discussing. And so I am going to participate there because I want to connect to 50 people or 4 people within the room. And so when they talk, I'm going to ask them questions and I want to understand them. And I'm going to use that as a setting to more closely connect with those people. Maybe it's because I want to serve them and help them feel more comfortable because I know there might be 4 people there that are uncomfortable with the topic. Or maybe it's because I just want to connect with people and I want to have our church community be one that I feel connected with, which means that I'm going to need to connect with other people. So maybe it is I need to change my goal on why I go there. I'm not suggest that that gets through the issue completely, but if we alter our expectations or our objectives of why we participate, if I go thinking that I'm going to change people's minds about the great insight that I had that everyone in the room needs to hear, I'm going to leave disappointed because that's not the setting for that. But I might go and find someone that I can connect with later about that topic, and we can have a good discussion about it because I've developed a relationship or a connection with them. Or I can go without any of those agendas and just say, I want to know these people. I want to know where they're coming from um, individually. That may be kind of a weak answer, Richard.
Actually, it's a really good answer. And it comes back to what you're sharing, what is our goal there? And I also thought you kind of inferred this that if, I've heard some stories where people have a difficult experience, but then back to the setting, they'll take that setting offline and they'll go to somebody's house or go out to lunch and try to do the things you're doing because their shared goal is to have a relationship and understand where someone's coming from. And you're right, it's pretty hard to do that in a one-on-one situation in Relief Society or Elders Quorum, but it could happen in someone's home or over lunch, and then it could make subsequent Relief Society Elders Quorum experiences better because you both know where each other are coming from, and you both have the shared goal to have Elders Quorum be a good experience and everybody feel welcome there. And that same principle applies to family circles and other circles. Any other thoughts you'd like to share, David, for our listeners about your book or anything else you want to talk about?
Well, I don't know if this is fair to offer. You can clip this out of the podcast if you want, but I'd like to donate some books.
Cool.
So, if there were some listeners that wanted to get a copy, but didn't want to spring for the publishing cost, would it be appropriate to offer like 20 books to your
Yes.
listeners that they could? I've got an email address. It's actually in the book. I'm trying to engage with people after the book is published because I do think it's a journey, and I think there's some people that want to participate with someone who is interested in this. So they could send a note to you or to this email address. I'd sign it. I don't think that matters much, but at least it would get you a book, and I could do 20 copies or something like that.
That is great. We will.
Do you want to clip that out, or do you want to keep that in the
I think
podcast?
that's in the podcast. That's great. And we will have the email in the show notes, listeners, so you can email Dave. You're one of the first 20 that email. You'll get a book, a signed book. But that same email will be there if you want to communicate with Dave and just have an ongoing discussion about the book. Questions. Sounds like you want to be present for those emails and engage with listeners and readers of the book. So we'll do that. That's a great idea. That's fair. No one's ever offered that before. I think that's great. Anything else you'd like to say?
I do think that Latter-day Saints are actually have an opportunity here to be involved in the healing of this world. We are a small people, but our theology encompasses the whole world. I would love it said at some point in the future that we as Latter-day Saints, whether it's institutional or individual, became a force in this early part of the 21st century at a time of polarization and contention that helped us navigate through this. I don't know exactly what that means. There are other Latter-day Saints that are working on this topic, and some have that vision maybe more clearly than I do. I think I have a hope that we could do that. And I am aware that there's others that have kind of concrete activities around this. For example, I got an email the other day. I didn't even know this was going on. But I live near Washington, D.C., and at the National Cathedral, there was an event that was being sponsored by a couple of Latter-day Saints that brought together a diverse panel of political leaders. Utah's governor was there. He's a Republican. Maryland governor was there. He's a Democrat. There were others and Republicans that were talking about how we need to solve the problem. That and uh, wrote up about this in particular ways. Um, two sponsors were Greg Prince and a retired federal judge named. So the sponsors included a man named Thomas Griffith. He is a retired federal judge. He served on the D.C. Court of Appeals. He's a Latter-day Saint. He's also a fellow at BYU in the Wheatley Institute. And Greg Prince, who's been actively involved in LDS discussions for a long time. And they sponsored this. The Deseret News was there. They were one of the monetary sponsors. They wrote up about this. If you read the Deseret News on a regular basis, you will see they're talking about these issues in a common way. So I think that there's a movement afoot that Latter-day Saints could be a part of. Maybe we can even be a significant part of that can help shape this really kind of ugly, contentious, difficult world that we live in right now. And help us be peacemakers. So that's my hope, that we can get there and that we can be a part of it, that I personally can be better at it. I think that's the pathway of discipleship.
I love that. I love your shout out to Governor Cox on this Disagree Better initiative. It probably is consistent with your book and your goals, and political leaders that are trying to step forward and maybe walk a little harder road sometimes, trying to bring us together and get common ground policy passed. I totally love your thoughts about our theology should help us lead on this discussion, because we believe we all voted for the same plan in the pre-earth life. So everybody that's here voted the same way we did. That wasn't a unified vote, because some people didn't vote for Christ's plan, but everybody here did. And so we are part of the same human family, children of the same heavenly parents. So if we go to the 40,000 foot level, like you've done for our listeners of our theology, we ought to lead on this, because we have that context of who everybody is, even people that sometimes are difficult for us. And maybe this spiritual connection we have and want to have with our same human family, and it's needed in a divisive time. So thanks for being on the podcast, my brother. I'll see you next week. I think you'll be in Salt Lake, and it'll be good to catch up. And thanks for all you're doing in our faith community and beyond. And listeners, please check out this book. It's a serious book, not meaning it's going to be like take you 2 years to read. It's just the content is really needed in really practical ways. Not obviously there's theory in there and the big picture, but one of the things that even with your call out boxes in the book is what we can do in a practical way to activate this in our circle of influence. Dave's earlier book is brown. So this book is not brown. This is blue. So when you look for this on Amazon or at Deseret Book and you're looking for a physical book, it's a blue book, a light blue book. And I like that visual imagery. The artwork on the book looks great. So thank you, David Ostler, for joining us. Thank you, our listeners, for listening and sharing this podcast. And look in the show notes again for the book links and also the email address for 20 signed books, the first 20 that respond. And this is Dave Ostler and Richard Ostler signing off from another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.